Okay, so this meeting is being recorded, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Lori, the fabulous Lori, on the secrets of resilient people. And so I'm going to put her presentation up for her. And Lori, I am going to turn it over to you to give your background. And thank you so much. I do want to just say it after Lori's presentation. If you put questions in the chat, we will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. And so please, while she's talking, do that. And then also we have a short video at the end. So once the video is end, we do have a closing video from our deputy or our new Health and Human Services Director, Tracy Gruber. Okay, Lori.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate that. So my name is Lori Giovannoni, and I just wanted to take a moment to give you some background about who I am. I recognize some of the folks that are in this breakout, but not everyone. So I wanted to give you about an idea of what qualifies me to talk to you about this topic of resilience. So first thing I learned from Paul's presentation is I'm an elder adult. I just love all these terms that you come up with once you pass 65. So I've had a long career, given I'm an elder, and I spent a lot of my career doing training and organizational development, similar to what I'm doing now. I did that for about 20, 25 years. And then my husband at the time was in a severe motorcycle accident, and I could no longer sustain my training business because I was in an airplane every other week. So I had the good fortune actually of going to work and being able to work with Tracy Lee at the Division of Services for People with Disabilities and learned just so much there. And after several years there, I had the good fortune of becoming the training director for the Division of Child and Family Services for the state of Utah as well. And just as of last year, I retired from my state employment and am back to training and development. But one of the things I want to point out that really gave me this kind of background in resiliency was, as a trainer and consultant, I had a knack for finding contracts that people really wanted to discuss how to stay healthy in certain environments. So for instance, when living in California, I was participating in a contract with the California Highway Patrol. And this was really the first time that the California Highway Patrol had hired anyone to teach what we were calling at that point in time, stress management. And the reason they did that was the average age of a non-accident related disability was 45 years of age. Now think about that. These are, at the time, they were all guys. These are guys that start out as cadets being in great shape. And then all of a sudden, by the time they didn't have the 20-year cap on their career at that time, but by the time they were in their 40s and mid 40s, a lot of them are out literally on non-accident related disabilities. In addition to that, what we saw with the California Highway Patrol was once a patrolman retired, there was a very high rate of death 1 year after retirement. We really wanted to get in there and see what was happening there. What was the case there? Again, really great shaped individuals, but after a career, something was up. In addition to that, I had the good fortune of working with an emergency room group in the Sacramento area, as well as the Bay Area. And what we discovered was ER docs are a breed, boy, I'll tell you. And this was a group of ER docs who most of them were marathon runners. So imagine that as a career. You're working as an ER doc, you're working weird shifts, and when you have time off, you're running marathons. And needless to say, this was a group of healers who weren't in really good shape. They were pretty much under the gun all of the time, if not in their work environment, in their personal environment, to constantly strive and strive and strive. And the last group that I worked with that I noticed there seemed to be a paradox in wellness was nurses. I did a lot of training of nurses, particularly in the Sacramento area. And it wasn't uncommon to walk in and work with a group of nurses who it became fairly apparent early on that weren't in the best shape themselves, although their job was to take care of other people. So that always fascinated me. And we would go in and, you know, talk about stress, and we would talk about how to take care of ourselves. But even to this point in time, what we realize is resilience is still very much a puzzle. And if you look at it as a puzzle, if you were to actually go into Google, let's say, and define resilience, you would see that it would offer up so many things, right? It would offer up skills and behaviors and competence. And if we just put that graphic up, Tracy, that has a puzzle on it, just so we can think about it in that fashion, you would find all sorts of labels as what defines resilience. But here's the deal, and this is the reason we have so much trouble with it. We do not live in a culture that really promotes resilience. We don't even live in a culture that promotes preventative medicine. We live in a culture that has a lot of information about that, but we don't live in a culture that promotes self-care. We still have that mentality of a work ethic beyond and above all things other. Now, what's happened with the pandemic, and as people have started to work at home, I thought it was really interesting. I saw an article yesterday that said so many people are in fact changing jobs because during the course of the pandemic, what they found was they were much more comfortable being at home than the office, and they don't want to go back to an office that isn't comfortable anymore. But again, resilience is really much up for grabs as a culture. It is really just now that it's entered the conversation with a force. We've danced around the edges of it, but we really haven't jumped into it, so to speak. And, you know, there's a history of resilience that is very kind of logical as well as chronological. Prior to resilience, we really had our first conversations as focused on stress. And that was in the 1950s. Prior to the 1950s, if you were to use the term stress, it was an architectural term that referenced two stress points as related to two beams. As two beams impacted each other, there was a stress point. It was in the 50s that it entered the medical dictionary, and actually the definition of stress is a real and or perceived threat to your physical, mental, or emotional survival. Now let's hear that again. Stress is a real or perceived threat to your physical, mental, or emotional survival. So I want you to hang on to that as a definition, because it's going to come up again. And when I was teaching stress management courses, I always used to say, you know, we live in a world today where a lot of us, we're familiar with the fight or flight response, right? And when we were wandering the land and there were saber-toothed tigers, the fight or flight response was very useful because we could flee that saber-toothed tiger. But today, we don't have very many saber-toothed tigers to flee, but we probably have more stress than we've ever experienced before. And actually, physiologically, the reaction is the same, whether it be saber-toothed tiger, whether it be loss of a job, whether it be being a caretaker. When you're under enormous amounts of stress, there's a hormonal reaction and a physiological reaction that takes place in your body that basically gets you into high gear. And what burnout is that you've actually been in high gear for so long that the systems in your body are starting to be impacted. You know, when you have stress, you've got adrenaline, noradrenaline pumped into your system. Typically your digestion is off, your circulation is off. And when you're in high levels of stress for extended periods of time, think about it like having your car in park, but your foot on the gas. You're going to wear your engine out eventually. And that was really the first conversation we began to have around stress, was just even describing the biological reactions to it. And after we talked about stress per se, we started to have classes in stress management. That was considered very revolutionary. You know, we were going to actually talk about, not only were we talking about stress, but we were going to talk about how, in fact, to manage your stress. And that conversation was followed by stress reduction, which was even more revolutionary, because all of a sudden there was this feeling like perhaps we can engage in activities and behaviors that would, in fact, minimize the stress we were experiencing. And that was really a lot of the teaching that I was doing at the California Highway Patrol and in hospitals. And you got to get the irony of this, right? I'm standing up telling doctors and nurses how to manage their stress. Luckily, I have a degree in public health, but that didn't go very far with doctors. And just so you know, it went even less distance with the California Highway Patrol. But resilience is really this kind of outcropping of this stress conversation. And it was really the 1990s that ushered in the conversation around resilience. And really, resilience took off in the 90s. And then with the occurrence of 9/11, not too terribly long after that, where the trauma was enormous and long lasting, we began to ask the question, when trauma does occur, when something happens that is really, really difficult, how do we bounce back from it? And how do we capture some vitality in the midst of that? And, you know, I think if you live long enough, you've all had experiences, whether it be parents having young children, elder adults, you know, having to be taken care of, or caregiving of other adults. If you're on the planet long enough, you're going to deal with something that has a somewhat of a long-lasting effect. And that's very much where and how resilience came into the conversation. There's been a lot of research done on resilience. There's been a lot of research done actually with the military with regards to resilience. But as we look at resilience, and we just kind of, I want to grapple and give it a definition. The most common definition is the ability to bounce back from a negative experience or a difficult challenge. You know, when a rubber ball is bounced and squeezed, it usually bounces right back. That's the metaphor that we use for resilience. And if we just stay here for a moment on this slide, resilience defined, we really started to take a look at resilience with a hard look in the world of child welfare. Isn't that interesting? You know, child welfare has really pushed a lot of topics that end up in the world of an adult health model. But in the world of child welfare, it wasn't so terribly long ago that we began to notice there were some children that were more resilient than other children. And what was it that these children possessed that allowed them to be so resilient? And what we began to discover was that children have a set of resources that is termed in the world of child welfare as protective factors. And if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about protective factors, because we all have it. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Tracy. Sorry about that. So, you know, we looked at kids and we said, wow, some of these kids go through all sorts of trauma, but they're extremely resilient. And they seem to have the ability to make it through these things and these traumas. And what is it that really has these children take on such a, I don't know how you want to call it, such a tough situation in the world and be so terribly resilient? And protective factors really boiled down to a number of things. Quite often it was the fact that they had parents, or they had someone who stood in as a primary parent and always created an environment for them that they felt safe in. And we know as a protective factor, when there is safety, that a lot of times children can really make it through anything. In addition to that, we look for protective factors that are nurturing and provide nurturance. We saw kids that perhaps the only place they felt safe and nurtured was in the school environment, but they did have an adult who in fact was very nurturing towards them. And what we began to see was when there was an experience of safety and an experience of nurturance, there was possibility for these children. There was even the possibility of moving beyond a worldview that they inhabited in their childhood into a larger worldview as they grew into adulthood. And I want you to keep that in mind when you're thinking about protective factors. I want you to keep in mind the experience of safety and nurturance allows for possibility. There's a great author, his name is Chilton Pearce. And Chilton Pearce wrote a book actually quite a while ago, a number of decades ago, but it was called The Magical Child. And that was followed by a book called The Magical Child Matures. And Chilton Pearce's entire outlook is really, the world has a built-in success system. And if you can just provide safety and nurturance, we will continue to evolve and we can move through things that are difficult. And he said, you know, every one of us were born into what he calls a matrix, which a matrix is nothing more than a structure within which an organism grows. And from one matrix to another, the more safety and nurturance you have, the more possibility you have. So I thought it was really interesting, right? And he said the following: one of the very first quote unquote matrices that we have is our primary parent. And the job of a primary parent is to do what? Provide us with safety and nurturance so that we have possibility, right? And some of us are very lucky. We had primary parents that were very good at that. Some children were not as lucky. They did not have primary parents that weren't as good at that. But you know, when we use the term primary parent, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a biological parent. Like I said, if some kids perhaps were raised by an auntie or a grandmother or a grandfather, and they were able to provide safety and nurturance for this child, they were considered a primary parent. They could move into the world of quote unquote possibility. So the next matrix that you move from the primary parent is the matrix of the world. And really that is leaving your home, going out into the world, going to school, going to work, dealing with all of those things that you deal with from childhood through teenage years, young adulthood, and adulthood. So let me ask you a question. How safe is the world? How nurturing is the world? How much possibility is there in the world, left to the world itself? And, you know, we all have difficulties out into the world. You can see young kids leave their primary parent, they go out into the world when they could go to in-class classrooms, you know, somebody makes fun of them. Their whole sense of safety is eroded. They go back to their primary parent. The primary parent creates an experience of safety for them again and nurturance for them again so that they can have possibility. You as an adult, perhaps you go to work, you know, you have a big report to do and to deliver. You deliver the report, it was not well accepted. Your sense of safety and nurturance, we don't use those words at work, but it's the same thing, right? Kind of crumbles. You go back home to your honey or your best friend, you know, or a family member, you tell them what happens, they reconstruct your experience of safety. So I think we have a good idea of what I'm talking about. So when it comes to resilience, I want to point out that the last matrix that we as adults live in is the matrix of the mind. You go from your primary parent to the world to the final matrix of your mind. And let me pose a question to you. How safe is it in your head? How nurtured do you feel in your head? How many times have you wanted something and talked yourself out of it? How many times have you started out thinking, it's going to be a bad day, and it just gets worse? Now, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but it isn't at all, because the first thing you need to know is resilience is not an innate behavior or personality trait. Resilience is actually a skill. And the primary skill of resilience, let's stay on this slide for a sec, Trace. The primary skill of the resilience is our ability to manage our mind and to create safety within our mind. We find that individuals who do have a protective factor, like a loving relationship in their life. It doesn't have to be just a partner. It could be a parent and child. It could be good friend to good friend. But we find individuals who have a loving relationship in their life do much better in this world of resilience. And how often have you, let's just take a look at a friend. How often have you gone to a friend and go, man, I really messed up, right? And the friend goes, no, you didn't really mess up. You're overreacting. It'll be fine. You say, no, do you really think so? No, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. You're overreacting. It's really that loving relationship that can recontextualize the experience for you. And we're going to talk specifically about strategies, but at this point in time, I want to drive home how sneaky that mind of yours can be. How many of you have had goals in your life and actually talked yourself out of your goal? And it was nothing more than your internal dialogue having a conversation with you about why you can't do it. And, you know, there have been some tough times in our lives where, if you're like me, I can actually recognize how detrimental one's mind can be if you don't watch it. At one point when my mother was passing away, I became very conscious of how critical my internal dialogue was of myself. And it was during that point in time, I really wanted to be with her and to be as present as I possibly could be with her. And I just stopped all of the negative dialogue. It was astounding to me that I could actually stop it. And one of the reasons I did that was I felt like I was hurting bad enough. I didn't have to hurt myself in addition to that with the negative dialogue. So it became apparent to me I could stop that voice in my head if I wanted to. And you know what I'm talking about, that voice in your head, right? The one in your head that you're going, what voice in my head? What is she talking about? It's that voice in your head. It's the voice that you hear when you look into the mirror every morning. And I'm sure most of you don't say, wow, is that a good looking person there, right? Man, am I hot this morning. If you're like me, never mind, we don't need to go there. But anyway, I want you to begin to recognize how powerful your mind is. We know individuals who have a sense of spirituality. This is larger and grander than religion, but have a sense of spirituality, or said another way, we know individuals who feel as though they have a belief that the world is a friendly place, actually do much better when it comes to being resilient. And all of those are conversations of the mind, right? Because if you live long enough on this planet, you're going to deal with some stuff, tough stuff. And sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's emotional. But the power of the mind when it comes to resilience is actually something that's extremely powerful. And as we begin to look at the skills that you can teach yourself with regards to resilience, you will begin to see that it is all the domain of the mind. So let's take a look at those skills that increase resilience. I want to reference the researcher on this. Her name is Lucy Hone. And Lucy Hone spent her career researching resilience. She had the good fortune of working on a contract with 1.1 million soldiers who had done tours in Afghanistan. And this contract was really to create soldiers who were not only in tip-top physical condition, but also tip-top mental condition. So as we go through these skills, I don't want you to think this is just the domain of the ethereal, or this is just the domain of self-help books. You know, this is the kind of research that was done with soldiers. And sometimes the language was different. They adjusted the language to fit the language of a soldier, but the skills were exactly the same. And Lucy Hone has a great TED talk as well on resilience that I would recommend if you're interested in it. She, like all of us, has gone through some pretty tough times. And she said one of the first things to understand is that tough things happen to all of us. So in Lucy's particular situation, she was working this contract on resilience with these soldiers, and she really thought this was her life work and this is what she was crafted to do. And, you know, she was right on target when in fact her 12-year-old daughter was killed in an automobile accident. And these were the skills that she used to help her get through it. And one of the first skills that she talks about is understanding that tough things happen to all of us. Or, you know, you could put it another way, that if you're on the planet long enough, there's going to be some suffering. And like all of us, like an elder adult, I've had my share too. I can remember my husband at the time was in a severe motorcycle accident, and he was in the hospital for 4 months and came home, and he needed 24/7 care for 2.5 years. And then I had the good fortune of being able to work for the Division of Services for People with Disabilities, and I learned a lot of things and got a lot of resources there. But it was interesting because I did find myself in a position of asking the question, why me? Why did this happen to me? And what Lucy Hone points out is that is a useless question. It is absolutely useless to ask the question, why me? She said, we've really come to live in an Instagram world, you know, where we see all these fantastic lives that these young people are living, and everything's perfect and everybody has tons of fame and tons of money. And in some respects, we've lost that insight into the world that life can be really tough. And it wasn't that many generations ago where all of our parents were immigrants, right? And we still have a large number of refugees coming to this country and making it kind of from the ground up. But her comment is the same I've made to you, is if you're on this planet long enough, tough things happen. And the point being is, don't feel discriminated against when tough things do happen. Just know that it is part of life, and it is, you know, it is imperative that asking the question why is a useless, you understand it is a useless question, and it will do nothing more than continue to depress you and to hurt you. So that question's off the book. The second thing is that people who are really resilient are very specific with their attention. And she says, be very specific with your attention. Know where you're putting it and what you're doing with it. Now, that's a whole lot easier said than done. I can remember when I was taking care of my husband full time, I'd often find the milk in the cupboard. And I would have normally blamed the kids on something like that, but the kids had been long gone out of the house. And all of a sudden, instead of putting the milk in the refrigerator, I was putting the milk in the cupboard. Oh my God. In addition to that, one month I locked my keys in the car 3 times. And AAA called me and said, if you lock your keys in the car one more time, lady, we're not going to come pick you up. Now, that kind of pulls the resilient rug right out from underneath you, right? My only safety I had was AAA at the time, and they're telling me they're not going to come save me. And in addition to that, I used to have the habit of taking my phone and putting it in my chest because I needed it wherever I went. And I can remember one day there was this huge pile of papers in front of me. We had kind of had this bar in our house, and I heard the phone ring, and I knew it was just in this pile of papers. I went through this pile of papers like 2 or 3 times, and I couldn't find the phone, and the phone was ringing. And I finally said to my husband, call my phone. I know it's in this pile of papers. So he calls my phone. Sure enough, we can hear it ring in the pile of papers again that's right in front of me. Well, lo and behold, it wasn't there. It was deep in the recesses of my chest. And that's when I knew I had just lost it. I was beginning to fall apart.
We're going to reopen the rooms. My apologies. I didn't realize that countdown was so quick. Let's go for it again. All right. Back to your rooms.
What would a conference be without some technical difficulties? Let's be honest. We've thought we had that issue resolved. Clearly, we got kicked out. It was not. So let's go back to Lori. Do we have you back? She's probably like, I got kicked out of my own presentation. Oh, you're on mute, Lori. Now you got to get yourself off mute. Sorry, and I will put you back up. I apologize. We thought we had that issue resolved. Clearly, we did not.
No problem. I was thoroughly entertaining myself as we were going on. All right. You hear me now? Okay, you can hear me, right? Yes? Okay, great. So actually, let me think about this. Let's go back to being specific with your attention. And I think you might have caught it, but you know, I started to break down just kind of like mentally. I'm locking my keys in the car, I'm putting the milk in the cupboard, I'm sticking my phone in my chest and I can't find my phone. And over the course of a number of years of taking care of my husband, what I realized was I'd lost the capacity to take care of myself. This was a guy who was always well-groomed, clean shaven, you know, well-dressed, clean clothes, great combed hair. And I was literally just the opposite. And it became apparent to me that I wasn't very good at taking care of myself. And that was actually a learned behavior that I had acquired over the course of years. It was nothing that my husband did to me. It was nothing other than my own style of being. And I can remember when I went to the doctors, I had it all, right? I had the great trifecta: high blood pressure, cholesterol, high sugar. And I can actually remember my doctor saying to me, you have to put as much attention on yourself as you do your husband. And I just didn't even know how to begin that. So sorry about that. When we talk about, with regards to resilience, be specific about your attention. We're not just talking about being present in the moment. We're talking about your ability to tune into the good in your life. In the world of the military, they phrased it as hunting the good stuff because, you know, you want to use military language. And your ability to tune into the good in your life, even when there's a difficult situation, is really very helpful. And it's helpful from a scientific standpoint. There's a gentleman, a researcher, his name is Marty Seligman. And Marty Seligman did a 6-month study with a group of people where they were asked to identify 3 good things during the day. Very generic, you could decide what they were, but they were just 3 good things that either happened to you or that you noticed during the day. And what they found was 6 months later, that particular group of people, first and foremost, in comparison to another control group, had less depression. They had greater happiness, and they had a greater capacity to be grateful for their lives. Now, Lucy Hone, as a researcher, isn't saying this is easy. I mean, Lucy Hone is saying this can be really difficult, particularly when you're dealing with difficult things. But, you know, you've all had the experience, right, of being around someone who just sucks the life out of you. Even when things are good, they're extremely negative. They're just like space suckers, right? You're around them, and after you spend a half hour with them, you feel totally depleted. Well, what I discovered was I could do that to myself. And this ability to tune into the good is really a fascinating skill, because it doesn't disregard the difficulties, but what it does do is it offers you a balance in your life. And one of the last ones, and in fact, the one that Lucy Hone has received the most feedback for on these strategies, secrets of very resilient people. The first three are extremely powerful. The last four seems to resonate with the widest audience. So the last one, which is 4, and that is asking the question, is what I'm doing helping or is it harming me? So let's think about it from that domain of the mind, going back to protective factors. Am I creating safety in my mind? Am I creating nurturance in my mind? If there's possibility, am I creating possibility? Or am I scaring myself in my mind? Am I catastrophizing it in my mind? Am I making it worse? Is what I'm doing helping or harming me? I can recall when my husband wasn't well, I would just catastrophize. He had a traumatic brain injury, and I'm not kidding you. They gave us a book this big, and I started to read that book and would just break down into tears. And what I discovered was you shouldn't read the book if you're someone like me, because I'll take it into my head and I'll run it over and over and over again. You know, some people, information doesn't do that to them, but it did it to me. It really made me feel rough and it made me feel bad. When you're dealing with stuff that's difficult, you know, I have a tendency, I don't drink, I don't smoke, but I eat. And when I grab that extra pastry, I ask the question, if I'm cognizant enough, is what I'm doing helping or is it harming me? And a lot of times what we'll do is we harm ourselves unconsciously. And I think it's very important that we carefully choose where we put our attention. I think we have to be cognizant of what we can change and accept what we cannot change. And we have to be good at noticing where our attention falls and is what we're doing helping us or is it harming us? As I said, her feedback on this number 4 has been enormous. And if you can just take that away in difficult times, is just take that last thing away and ask that question, I think you'll find that it proves to be very useful. The other thing to keep in mind is we actually are better at resilience as we age. And, you know, when Paul talked about the stereotypes that we have for folks who are older, I think there are so many stereotypes. Having retired from the state, I know there's a stereotype around retirement, right? And I always thought it was the greatest thing in the world and still do. But I notice a lot of people have a lot of beliefs around retirement. What we know about older people, one of the benefits of aging is that resilience scores go up as people get older. And the reason for that is as individuals age, they've been through a lot of difficulties in life. They've had a lot of ups and downs, and they know what works and what doesn't work. And they know what builds resilience and what doesn't build resilience. You've seen it in a lot of the statistics coming out of the pandemic. You know, the pandemic has been really interesting. The pandemic has actually created a firestorm of information around resilience, because let's think about that. The pandemic took away a lot of our protective factors, did it not? It wasn't safe. It wasn't safe to go outside. It wasn't safe to be around people. It certainly wasn't nurturing. We all know, regardless of age, isolation was very tough on people. In-home schooling was very difficult on parents as well as kids. Mental health incidents for teenagers in Colorado, it's been deemed a state emergency because so many teenagers have been showing up in the ER room with suicidal ideation. This pandemic really kicked all those protective factors out the door. But you know what's interesting? When they survey adults with regards to how they felt they did during the pandemic, there's a tremendous amount of research out now that shows older adults actually fared much better than the rest of the population. And I thought that was fascinating because I think, for me at least, I said to my daughter-in-law once, if they call me a vulnerable population one more time, I'm going to smack somebody. Honestly, I'm going to smack them. And it was hard. Don't get me wrong. It was really hard. But we are going to have this conversation consistently, right? Because of this pandemic. We had it for a while with 9/11. It lasted for a while. But like all things, when they're out of our vision, they have a tendency to go away. This is not going away. This is going to have long-term effects. And it is going to be in our best steed to be able to take this conversation and to flush it out and to create these environments of safety and nurturance so we can, in fact, have possibility in the world and offer that to other people. You know, I think in the world of, if you want to call it the elderly, I don't prefer that myself. I'm an elder adult. I do think a lot of times stereotypes get in the way. I thought it was fascinating when Paul said, don't underestimate a witness who is 85 or 87. Just because they're slow doesn't mean that they can't bring to the game what they need to be effective. I think the same is true here. I actually think our society has lost a lot of resilience because we have lost grandparents being right next door. When I grew up, I had a set of grandparents next door, and the grandparents that lived so far away were 6 blocks away. I literally grew up with like 3 sets of parents and, you know, 3 tables of Italian food, which wasn't so great, but 3 families I could go to that I knew I would be taken care of at any point in time. And I think as we've become more mobile and we've lost that family structure, we've had to recreate family structures for ourselves. And again, the pandemic really had such a devastating effect because one of the things it did was take away this family structure that we were all used to. So let me leave you with this. Ask yourself the question, how safe is it in your head throughout the day? And, you know, don't wait for something rough to happen. Just kind of investigate. What's it like living in your mind? Be very specific. You know, tune into the good. We all know that journaling works. We all know that a lot of writing activities work, but we also know there's research that says if you identify 3 things, just 3 things during the day that are good, that incidence of depression goes down, happiness goes up, and your ability to be grateful goes up. And when tough things do happen, recognize that's a part of life. I mean, you know, if you're on the planet long enough, something tough is going to happen. And just like older adults have come to recognize, more often than not, you make your way through it. For those folks who aren't quite in that age bracket yet, you know, this is part of the learning. This is what it takes, and we can all make ourselves through it. You know, sometimes in life, things are so good, we get a little anxious, don't we? I mean, have you ever had it so good in your life, you start to go, I don't know. It's been awful good for an awful long time now. I better worry about something, because if I don't worry about something, it's going to catch me by surprise. At least this way, I'll be ready for it. That is nuts, just so you know. That is taking every moment of grace and leisure and fun that you had and stripping it away because you decided to put your attention someplace that is creating mischief. Do not do that. Don't do that now. So when it comes to something tough later in life, we don't want you to lose what you have to that which you have lost, right? And we're all going to be there at some point in time. So I don't know where we are with time, Trace, but before we get questions, if we have any questions, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your attention. I know a lot of you in the audience, in fact, are professionals yourself who could have probably done this course as well, if not better than I am. And for that, I am very grateful for your attention. Okay. I don't see any questions. I have one chat.
Let's see. So you can either take yourself off mute and ask a question, or you can put one in the chat. I was just trying to check the chat. I was worried about messing up Lori's presentation if I started opening the chat. But
No
I
problem.
don't see any. So you can either put a question in the chat or you can just take yourself off mute and ask Lori yourself. We have about 5 minutes.
If you don't ask a question, I'm going to have to talk.
We have you did a really good job and it was great.
Well, that's great. That's actually better than a question. Thank you. You know, Zoom is really tough for me. Talk about stress. I stress out much more on a Zoom call than I ever have in person. I just miss that connection. And like, I can hardly wait to do a presentation in person. So if you ever need one, let me know.
I agree there. It's a little challenging, especially to see yourself.
Yeah.
You're watching yourself too. And you're like, oh.
And you know, actually the research talking about how stressful Zoom presentations are, that's part of it, is that you're looking at yourself nonstop.
Yeah. And it's hard.
All right.
I love the 3 good things. And it also puts like a little bit of pressure to try to be someone's good thing at the end of every day.
Well, thank you, Chris Wynn, one of my best friends. You don't have to be someone's good thing. You just naturally are born into the world as someone's good thing.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
But I love that idea. It just is so simple.
Right.
3 things at the end of the day. I mean, we can all do that in our brain.
Right. Yeah, it is. And that's what Lucy Hone says. You know, I don't want you to diminish this because of who I am. Lucy Hone is a very hardcore researcher. And even though those things sound so simple, one of the things she said was, you know, the bottom line is you just have to be willing to let these things work for you. You have to be willing to do it enough and let it work for you. And that it does work for you.
So Lori, we do have a couple questions. How do we contact you as a presenter? And I did, that last slide was up there, but it was up there pretty short time. So I don't know if you want to tell them that real quick.
So I am actually going to give you my phone number for whoever asked that. My phone number is 801-910-2118. 801-910-2118. My email is lorigiovannoni@gmail.com. Giovannoni is a mouthful, but here goes. You all ready? LORIGIOVANNONI. lorigiovannoni@gmail.com. If you get stuck, call Tracy.
Yep. Call me. I'll help you get you there.
All right.
All right. So we got more kudos. Thank you so much. So much valuable. I took lots of notes. Thank you. Glad. I love the 3 good things. During a very stressful, difficult time, I forced myself to do that. And now people say I'm one of the most optimistic persons they know. That wasn't before I started the 3 things. So awesome.
That's great. All right.
Okay, well, if there are not any more questions, we want to thank everybody for participating. And most importantly, we want to thank Lori for her fantastic presentation on resiliency. We are going to close out the session, if I don't mess this up as well, by playing a short video from the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Tracy Gruber.
Thank you for taking time to attend the Elder Abuse Conference. I appreciate your support and dedication to addressing this critical public health issue. Older adults often blame themselves when abuse occurs, resulting in shame and silence, which makes your awareness and involvement all the more important. If you have reason to believe that an older adult has been the subject of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, please contact Adult Protective Services at 1-800-371-7897 or contact the nearest law enforcement agency. It's imperative that we all work together to increase awareness and reduce mistreatment of vulnerable Utahns.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending today. We really appreciate it. We need to take care of all Utahns, but we need to take special care of our older adults and our vulnerable adults in the state of Utah. If you have any questions, please reach out to me individually. I'm happy to answer them. And I hope you all have a fantastic day.